and we'll have Kate.
Yep, I'm Kate Compton. I'm just got here at Northwestern as a new professor.
Excellent. So welcome all of you. I'm Christoph Salger from the University of Hertfordshire, and in case my internet connection drops out, just continue without me and talk amongst yourself, ideally about the topic. So what we're going to talk about today is designing games for remote play. And funnily enough, I was actually originally planning a different panel, which involved a lot of physical interaction and using the space of being together in one room, which had to be canceled because we're not doing that. So we thought we'd take the opportunity to actually look at a very timely subject that a lot of us might be sadly very familiar with, remote play or distance play or online play. I guess we can call it different words. And today, I would just like to talk a little bit about, like, what people's experiences are. But since we have a bunch of experts on, I think we should then also probe into what actually works and why does it work. And then I'd also like to probe a little bit the question of, like, who does this work for? Who are the people who this doesn't work for? And then ultimately, maybe also chat that if there are like opportunities, like if we were to specifically design something for this space, I mean, what would it look like? And is there some kind of, actual cool aspects maybe of this whole thing that, we might wish persist even beyond us being more or less forced to engage in remote play only. But to kind of, before I start out with an easy question, if you in the audience have any question, I mean, either put them in the chat and I or one of the panelists will read them out. You can also just say, I have a question, and then we might just call upon you. Or you can raise your hand, which for some reason I notoriously always overlook on the Zoom meeting screen because I have like too many windows open. But with that all in mind, remember, we're still playing the palindrome game. And on top of that, my starting off question is, what have you guys been playing recently? So do you actually have any experience with remote play? And maybe we'll go to Kate first because I know she has an answer.
Let's see, yeah, so what experiences have I been playing with remote play? A lot. So our department has been fairly, distributed, even though most of us are still in Santa Cruz. And so I've played a lot of Animal Crossing. Like most people, I've had Animal Crossing gatherings. Just yesterday, we had the spreadsheet party. So we can definitely talk more about that later as well. And yeah, I've actually played a couple of VR telepresence games. The partner and I do occasional extremely nerdy VR distance dates. So I can talk about those as well.
Jose?
Yeah, so in the before times, I have a sort of a regular board game group. And we've actually continued playing online. So I've been using Board Game Arena. And I'm surprised by how well everything works on the site and how easy the transition was for us to start playing on that with, say, a Discord channel on the side, rather than, it seems almost easier than they're getting together in person and figuring out what to play and setting the game up and so on. I've also played a couple of games over Zoom, and these were usually part of bigger sort of social things, sort of alumni meetups, that kind of stuff. And then we'd organize some sort of game, some sort of activity to play there. And so in many ways, I played more sort of face-to-face style games during the pandemic than I had like in the 6 months prior, the year prior, which is kind of unusual. Obviously, online play has still been a big part of that, but I don't think much has changed in that arena. I think the surprise here has been saying, taking what I prize as a face-to-face kind of activity and realizing that actually, it works pretty well when you go online, and better in some ways.
Okay, who wants to go next? Jesper?
Yeah, I can go. So I think my life here has been kind of split. I've been pulled very strongly in several directions. So definitely my life has had a very strong like offline pull. So one of the things that happens every day is my kids want me to jump on the trampoline with them, and so that's definitely. And then the other thing is that the kind of games I've been playing have been kind of very incidental. So often it's been like, kind of on Zoom meetings or like birthdays, these kind of super kind of impromptu games. And so that's on one hand, and then the other hand is like these kind of bite-sized asynchronous games where you feel part of a kind of a civic community. Just things like Clash Royale and Clash of Clans. Just these kind of games where you're part of a clan and you're kind of working to kind of level up together and so on. And so those have been the kind of games that I've been making. So playing. So it's like between like the analog games and the kind of very kind of gamey asynchronous games and the sort of very impromptu kind of games on Zoom and so for birthdays and other occasions.
And Anne?
Sorry. Yeah, I also have been probably playing more games now that we're remote than I was not remote. So like Kate, quite a bit of Animal Crossing and having gatherings there. But I'm also, sorry, there's a baseball thing going on again. This came up in the last panel, how to pronounce it. So anyway, gosh, hello. It's very early here. So I've been playing a lot of role-playing games, also like tabletop role-playing games, which actually has become a lot easier because our schedules align better because we're at home more, but also just not having to worry about travel, where we're going to meet, the fact that I can play with more people that are maybe not necessarily in my geographical location. Of course, when you play, it's like just have 1,000 tabs open because you're using 15 different apps. But and then, of course, as I think it was Jesper that mentioned, some, or I think it was Jose. So games on Zoom. So I've done quite a bit of Jackbox, which is surprisingly fun. I wasn't expecting it to be, but some of those games are quite fun.
Yeah, I mean, I just to show a little bit of street cred here too. I mean, I've also been playing a lot of tabletop role-playing games. So I used to be part of a club where different games would be played kind of on a rotator basis. So you would switch over every 3 months. But now we've just moved most of that online. So I'm still regularly having role-play tabletop experience, but it's a slightly different. And I do occasionally play like these kind of Fall Guys and these other kind of online games, Drawful online. But I already did that before because I had like all these friends back in New York. The one thing I started new is actually, weirdly enough, like some kind of on these exercise walks that I'm now also forced to take. I ended up trying out like different location-based games, like one, for example, where you have to like encircle an area and then kind of conquer it to kind of motivate me to walk further or try out like different routes, which kind of has a remote play element because there are other people there also kind of walking in the same space, but it's not that interactive. But the follow-up question basically is, and maybe let's just do this with a bit more, just pop in when you want to talk. I feel like calling up people's names, a bit school mastery here. Did you find it works, or was there any kind of big hurdles, or what do you think the problems are with playing this way?
So I'd like to make a distinction between just regular online multiplayer and stuff that I've seen pop up in the pandemic.
Okay.
And I think in this context, I've seen, I'm gonna exaggerate a little bit. There's sort of a revival of folk games, sort of games that you would play impromptu at a dinner party and so on, rather than sort of commercial games. Like, so it's like, yes, we played this other commercial game while playing on Zoom. For me, it's very different than, yeah, we had the Zoom meeting and someone decided, hey, let's play a trivia game. And they were sort of just asking questions they're finding from a website, and they split people into teams. Or, hey, let's play charades and use Zoom's like drawing on the screen function. Or let's play, oh, we're all stuck in our homes, so let's do a scavenger hunt. That would be funny. Everybody needs to come up with like 3 bottles of wine, or that kind of stuff. And so that's, for me, has been interesting, as people have been, or at least in my experience, using these as a way to bring some of these Zoom meetings together and give them some coherence. give people like a sense of fun and participation, where it's okay if people drop in, drop out, because, you know, hey, someone pops in and now you're on team B. Okay, cool. What's going on? Taking advantage of the functionality. Like, I've seen a lot of people making use of the background function in Zoom. So they'll say, you know, people have queued up a couple of videos, for example, and then they'll do something like say, okay, I changed my background and where am I at? You know, and it's like a background from like a sitcom or a TV show or something like that. And so those kinds of activities I think are interesting because they're sort of, I mean, ultimately, like, you can't get rid of play and people are going to play regardless of where they are. But I think it's interesting, this sort of uptake of these kinds of folk games that I wouldn't play if we were getting together at a dinner party. We'd just be like drinking, eating, and you know, and laughing and so on. We wouldn't play like charades. At least, I don't know, that's been my experience. Maybe people really do get together and play charades.
Yeah, I like that these games feel incomplete in some way. They're not sort of polished things that fit in the giant gloom box. They're things where it feels like you're supposed to bring a lot more to the game to make them complete, or they're not designed to be complete. And so I think of things, you know, Animal Crossing actually for me fills that requirement because it's, you know, it's sold in a box, it's sold as a complete experience, except that the experience that you use is that as a sort of a medium over which you're like creating your own games. And they do a lot of like small incomplete affordances, things like meteor showers and scuba diving and collecting things and movable objects. I don't know how many intentionally, how many unintentionally, but that people use as a substrate to make their more completed social experiences around.
I mean, I do also wonder, both based on what Jasper said and you said, if there's like a specific void created by the current situation that causes people to become like more kind of designers themselves. So that, you know, that in our regular life, a lot of our gameplay time is kind of well cared for by designers that tilled this field thoroughly. And now we're in this weird space where, you know, there maybe isn't as much yet. And so we are kind of more encouraged to come up with our own games. Is Jasper raising a hand, or I'm not sure? Yeah, please go.
No, but I think that's kind of interesting, right? Point. So I think Bernie de Koven talked about this from the New Games movement. This idea that they wanted to have games where you were allowed to change the rules, and then like by extension, once you learn to do that, you might change like the larger rules of society and so on. And so I definitely feel that there's a kind of a hunger for control, or for not being controlled, at least, right? And that's also what I think what we see, especially in these games, because we're so stuck on kind of Zoom and Google Docs and so on, then it becomes interesting to kind of appropriate these kind of seemingly oppressive tools for kind of play, which often what you do with play, or as a kid you play with your food and so on, right? So suddenly that just becomes like really, really interesting to figure out what can you do with Google Sheets, for example. What can you do with Zoom, and how can you use these kind of well-meaning, kind of dull, kind of corporate functionality of Zoom to do something that's actually kind of fun and kind of breaks it. So I think it's definitely, yeah, it kind of, I guess it feels oppositional, right? So it feels like we're working in opposition to kind of Zoom and Google, right? Mm-hmm. But we're just making them more money, obviously. But it feels like that way, like that.
Yeah, there's like the little thrill of counterplay, yeah. of it's the same thrill you get from stealing pens from an office, or staying late and having your board game on Office Space, or playing laser tag in your college campus. It's like, I get to steal these tools. And I think part of it is also just we didn't realize, like, we still don't know how human sociology works in groups. Every time there's a different condition, it turns out there was some load-bearing element of eye contact that we always took for granted and built these entire game designs around. Like, it's very hard to play Settlers of Catan without eye contact and gestures, and like the slight threatening gesture of when somebody is horning in on your territory. And once you take that out, you realize that a lot of the game design breaks down. And so I think what a lot of these reused tools, or the reason that we need to have these tools that are unfinished or have like a void in them, is because you need some place to fill in the gaps as you discover them. And each time we fill in a new gap, we discover that there's a new thing that we didn't have.
By the way, we have some questions on Zoom now, so let's maybe tilt a little bit to them, but I think this one might connect to this. So do you think that Zoom fatigue applies to playing games online, or does the play and social experience trump it, from John Aycock?
Interesting question. I guess I haven't been in a position of sort of strong Zoom fatigue, but the people that I've had sort of playful and game interactions in Zoom, I would describe as not your typical board gamers or video gamers. And so for this crowd, I'd say it's more like, hey, in the 1950s, before there was like television and before there was internet, people would gather in their homes and they would play these games, and that was entertainment. So I think it's part of the social entertainment need that humans have. And so sure, I'll jump on Zoom and we'll play a funny game and we'll have fun. It'd be like a dinner party with the games going on, the play activity plus the eating, right? And obviously a lot of these games are centered around food and drinking, at least in my experience. Not drinking games in the let's get drunk woo-hoo-hoo sense, but more of the like, okay, we'll get together and we'll have it'll be the tiki Zoom party, right? And so there's like a theme and people will wear funny hats and sunglasses and so on. And I think that harkens back more, in my opinion, to the dinner party, like the more informal type dinner party and the kind of play you would see at this pre-television, pre-internet, like all this other nonsense, than it does to like, let's take over like Zoom and make our use of it. Or I'm tired of using Zoom in a regular way. Let's use it in this different way. Actually, I have a question for the audience. I'm curious. Just type in yes if the answer is true. Have you played any games over Zoom, like using Zoom specifically as a tool to play the game?
I guess you also count like other video conferencing platforms, right?
Yeah, similar, but not stuff like that is designed with games in mind. I think like, yeah, we got together in Zoom, we had a meeting, and we played a game that was sort of not supported by the tool. Yes, a couple of yeses.
Like weirdly enough, my role-playing group kind of rotated through a lot of things. So we've tried like Google Hangouts and then Google Video and then Discord and Zoom, and always somebody has some problem with something. I mean, it's probably because several of the people I play with have like tech backgrounds and are kind of picky about their tools, but which I guess is another issue that then shatters that transparency that Zoom gives you, right? That somebody goes like, I can't adjust your volume individually for each of you. I don't like this tool. I mean, even so, it doesn't work in reality either, right? So, yes, people sometimes wish they could adjust my volume down. Let's have a quick look at the question thread before it completely disappears. So somebody also asked, Henry asked, do you think remote play allows for various rituals around and between play? For example, our tabletop group takes breaks and eats pizza together. I think this is an integral part of these days. So I guess a lot of people are nodding. Jasper?
Yeah, so I think that with like the Tiki example and the, so we had my father's 80 years birthday, and we had to do it on Zoom, right? And so then we decided that we had like an Italian menu, and we ordered him Italian wine and so on. So it just seems that it's kind of it's really important to have these kind of shared objects, right? And so it reminds me a bit of like, I think it was Janet Murray's old point about games being about shared attention. Like, so you have some shared object that you're attending to, and then having like the kind of like the shared meals and so on just become kind of really important kind of way of dealing with that. But also I think it's also a bit like why all of these games that work so well are often about having a kind of shared object in a sense, right? So we talked about, I think it was Kate's point, all these kind of, anything that involves these kind of subtle kind of, are you bluffing or not kind of thing are kind of difficult, right? But anything that involves like a shared object that you're manipulating actually works really well. And so I think it's also why it's like meetings are much better if you're editing a Google Doc together, right? And so anything, so it's a big reason why you have like, yeah, Animal Crossing or Minecraft, or it's also, I think, the reason why Fortnite is kind of more popular than PUBG right now, I think, because actually you're actually building, the forts don't just like have a gameplay value, but you're also like building things with your friends. If you made a change to the world and it's shared. So I think that's just kind of, those are things that are just really, really, really important, and which kind of takes you away from that kind of Zoom immateriality or kind of distance that you have now. You actually feel like you're doing something together.
So I tend to play remote games with other crafters, and so a lot of times it's kind of done at the same time, but you know, you play a role-playing game and somebody's taking a while and you want to have something to do. So we all just bring like hand sewing or hand knitting. And we're kind of all working on that. And so when somebody finishes something or, you know, talk about what we're making ends up being part of the table talk.
Okay. By the way, I'll be right back. I'll have to do some internet reset, but you keep this going. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I've been using the term chat toys or chat pets occasionally. So I used this even back when I was like working on the Google Assistant to try to figure out what it is that you need to fill the space of a conversation. So if you, and I think we realized that this happens a lot with sociology. So if you have a boys' poker night, they can be playing poker, manipulating cards, mostly talking about that. And then every so often, you only have to fill this much of the conversation with kind of real human connection for it to feel like a conversation. If you've ever had a bad first date, where the food's not very interesting, the place is not very interesting, you feel like you have to fill this much of the conversation. And so things like chat pets and chat toys, I like to think of as sort of either digital or physical objects where there's a clear set of affordances, a clear set of rules, and anytime you feel like you can't fill this much of the conversation, there's like easy, like, oh, do you have a cat? Show us your cat. That's always a valid move. And so knowing that that's always a valid move is great. So folks who are playing Blazeball know that you can almost always bring up Blazeball if the conversation lulls, and that fills it, which is really interesting because Blazeball was created as a sort of parody of baseball, because it turns out that like city sports fill the same, or like civic sports fill the same amount of space of like, oh yeah, no, how are the Mets doing? And so you can always have that kind of conversational element. Like, so this is your like menu of chat toys that you can bring in at any particular instance, and they vary from group to group, and the better platforms add them. I was just at a VR Burning Man experience, and it was like, you know, a table or like a room full of strangers, cool like party space, lots of dance music, but then they had a table full of raver toys, and you could just like pick up a raver toy and start manipulating it. And then everybody would ask you like, oh, how did you pick up that one? Oh, wow, how did you like make that like lightsaber giant like that? And so it was really just a table full of conversational objects that allowed people to mingle without having to be like, so where are you? Have you ever used VR before, etc.
That's cool. It's sort of like digital tools for social lubrication.
Mm-hmm.
In many ways.
I was wondering, is lubrication a palindrome, or did you just slip it in because it's like such a great word to use?
It's not a palindrome.
Too bad.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, please.
So I think it's also a bit like, I mean, what happens if you're stuck inside? You can't go out in your kayak or whatever it is you usually do. But I also been, I mean, the thing about indie games lately. So you can say, I think to one extent, indie games in a way is an answer to that problem that video games have been seen as too anonymous or too kind of technological. And so then the question, in a way, I think that indie games have tried to answer is that how do you do something make something that's really technological and distributed in an immaterial way, but that still feels in a way handcrafted, right? And I think so. One of the answers is, I think, what Kurt Halkett calls kind of conspicuous production, right? This idea of that the good or the object, or in this case the game, where in a way part of the meaning is derived from the way it was created, right? So it has a story about why somebody made the game and under what circumstances. And then typically you try to do, say, in games like a visual design, so it's like the pixelation or the hand-drawn and so on, that actually gives a sense of materiality, right? And so I think that's also perhaps seems to be, I think, the thing we're dealing with right now, right? So when everything is completely immaterial, how can we still create something that actually feels like it comes from this specific person and has some kind of materiality to it? I think perhaps that's perhaps is the whole kind of challenge right now, right? And then you can either do like tabletop simulator and then kind of emulate something physical, or you can just kind of throw it all overboard, right? And just go Google Sheets, right?
I mean, I have to admit, I really struggle with tabletop simulator. So I did play quite a lot of like tabletop games beforehand, and I mean, like my role-playing experience, I find works okay-ish online, and there's actually some cool extra elements, like that idea of, as somebody pointed out, like this parallel play. And we often used to play sessions where people had to go at a separate table, and now you can pass information secretly on a side channel and have all these things going on. And we're also nowadays where we're traveling to new towns, and then you can just like look up the map, everybody on Google Maps, and you can like bring in pictures from the real world, and it's really kind of enhancing this. But with board games, I just feel that, the physicality is missing, and I just don't enjoy it. And then I think I'd rather play something that leans more into the digital, and I can just play a multiplayer game that doesn't try to kind of replicate the constraints that board games have in the digital world.
I'd recommend Board Game Arena for the board game side of things. It really favors quickly switching from game to games, and the games run much faster. That with a voice audio.
No, but I think, I think there are good solutions there. What I'm saying is, it feels like board games are designed very specifically for the sitting around the table. And while I do enjoy board games, I often feel like they have design limitations because they are made, they don't have like computer support and stuff like that. And I was wondering, if you wanted to play online or remotely anyways, you might just do something that it just feels like kind of weirdly piped in. So I don't mind anybody playing board games online, but I personally feel like this is, because I play like a lot of different games, this is the one that I think, okay, I don't need to play this online. I think there are like games I enjoy more remotely.
I have a question also, I think, for the audience and perhaps the rest of the panel too, because maybe we're also too holed up in our own little bubble. And I don't have any stats to like demonstrate any of this. This is purely the anecdote of my kids. So I've noticed my kids' play activity is remained essentially the same. So my son was playing a bunch of video games online with his friends anyways, and that has continued. But he hasn't added new kinds of activities to his sort of repertoire. And I get the sense that it's only adults who are basically trying to find some new way to play, and that it might be like a generational thing. Like, oh, we missed the X. And so we're trying to find it in a Zoom activity or in somewhere else. And the kids are like, yeah, it's kind of, I miss playing with my friends. At a certain, like the lower age, perhaps ones miss playing with their friends face to face. But at least perhaps in just the teenage years, they're like, it's all the same.
So I find that, for my friends that are on online games, that has not changed. Like my, the what we play hasn't changed at all. It's for my adult friends that aren't playing online games, where we've come up with these other types of online interactions. And I have actually done a scavenger hunt as part of a quilt guild activity. So that is definitely something that happens. So I think maybe that's part of it. Like, most of the current generation is already online and playing online.
Yeah, I remember even before the pandemic, there were a lot of think pieces about how Fortnite was the new third place for teenagers, because there is so much more policing of their motion through space. Like, there just aren't walkable spaces. They're not allowed to borrow the car. They're not allowed to like loiter. And so they'd already been flooding these third spaces online. So yeah, I wonder how much of that plays into it. I miss Starbucks, like, whoa, like just sitting in a coffee shop. But that was always my third place, was coffee shops. And so I'm feeling the pain of losing those. But if that wasn't, I can definitely see how that would translate to our current experience.
But it's funny, for my 9-year-old, so him and his friends, they weren't playing that much online. So like the pandemic was just like, they all got phones and they all started playing Fortnite together, like that. And it probably would have come, but it just pushed everybody like this. And now it's all of this. Now I get to do tech support for parents of his friends who can't figure out how to make friends and friend requests in Fortnite and so on. So yeah, everybody's learning, I guess.
So do you guys?
I was going to say, this kind of plays into Antonius's question in chat from a little bit ago, which is, do we play more games now because we have more time or feel more restricted? Or do we play games because we want to get to become more social or have fun because of the scarcity of above? Here, I'll copy and paste it in chat because it's a little wordy. Not that that was too wordy. I just can't hear very well. Okay, there we go.
I guess I'm not sure that we play more or play less, to be honest.
Mhm. Yeah, in my group, there's definitely a spectrum of, we're all on Discords now. I now have a whole bunch of Discords. Discords were extremely a survival line for some of my like early pandemic days, because I was just feeling like left out of the world. And then we had like little subtle rituals or play moments in those Discords. And then sometimes we like go on to full on game hangouts. And then sometimes we actually play games with win conditions. And it's really unclear how much of any of that time is spent in any given place. But it's all about like just keeping us connected, and not just like have fun.
Okay. At this point, I actually I saw also a question from Rafa, which I'm going to. Oh no, this I now send to Anne privately. Sorry about that, Anne. So the question is. Remote playing misses a wide field of view of presential board games. Did anyone think of explicitly using this as part of a gameplay mechanic? So let's start with this, but I also want to know, I mean, do you guys see opportunities in designing games for online play? I mean, are there like cool features you would like to leverage?
So one thing I've noticed is a couple of game companies, so actual board game companies have released sort of Zoom versions, or not Zoom, like digital friendly versions or remote play friendly versions of their games, where the idea is that one person is supposed to own the game, the box, like the $60 box. And they basically provide digital materials that are the things that you would, let's say, distribute to the other players if you're playing in person. And I thought that was like sort of a clever way to sort of get up on the market. So I say, hey, you can play Settlers of Catan, the board game. This is wrong, bad example. Like whatever the game is, the board game, and just send your friends like all these PDFs, and then you will be able to play this game. And the PDFs don't include everything because what the other stuff you need is inside the box. So I've seen this sort of hybrid model, which I think is kind of interesting. I see a lot of companies also releasing print and play versions of some of their games as teasers, or as just straight up like, screw it, like it's a pandemic, let's be cool. And so here's our game, the print and play, download these PDFs, print it, play at home with your family, with your friends, which I also think is kind of interesting, how that's pushed the print and play kind of in the next direction.
But this, I mean, I definitely hear what you're saying, but I think there's like this tension between, let's say, this feels like kind of an adaptation to the online field rather than, let's say, something where you go, here we can like clearly go beyond this. So to maybe give a different example, but from computer games, I remember like about 10, 15 years ago, at least in Germany, there was like this big conversation people had about silver gamers and older people who you wouldn't imagine getting into gaming. And one of the things that was pushed forward was to say, well, we have a generation that can't leave the house anymore. They might not be able to walk. They might have like other issues. Their friends locally might have literally died out. And so now they can still meet online and, for example, play cards with other people who are also lonely in their house, and they play cards and they chat over it, and they don't need to walk. And there's always, there's forums where always somebody is online. So, all this like difficult negotiation of finding game partners is gone. And so there was like an opportunity there for this remote play to kind of build something that they couldn't have in the offline world. And I'm wondering, I mean, if there's something like that we're seeing where people say this is like a wonderful feature, like, or with the role-playing games, like if you're playing some kind of role-playing game saga that involves a lot of treachery, then you have the chance to have like these remote side channels in a much more subtle way, or like an integration of technology, right? I mean, imagine you say, here's a video of like somebody instructing you from your next mission, or everybody gets documents, and all of this would be so cumbersome around the table, right?
Yeah. I've had some great experiences in VR that changed the way that I think about people, because it's they're able to play. So the telepresence in VR, I don't know if you played it recently, has gotten like good. Like you are there, the person is there, the there-ness is there. But you can change sizes. So sometimes people spawn in very short, and you're actually looking up at another person. There's a couple that like intentionally play with, there's a very good hide and seek in a game called Half and Half, where half the players, like there's 3 players that turn very small and they're hiding in these little houses. And 3 of the players turn giant and they are trying to look through the houses and find the little people. And so you're actually like getting an experience of being social with one person being 60 feet high and the other person being 5 inches high. So that is about the most radical shift that you couldn't get in board games otherwise that I've experienced.
Yeah, most of the things I've experienced, they're play. I wouldn't call them games. They're more play-like. But just the fact that, I mean, I think I mentioned this with the role-playing games where, you know, I'm playing this game where we're over 3 different states and there's no way we could do that in person. But likewise, you know, we do all of these crafters, we like to get together and craft together. But if you do something, say with sewing, you have this big old, like your equipment is big and it's heavy. And so to have a sew day is an event. Whereas now we just have like a little chat group on, you know, and if anybody's up for, you know, sewing or any type of crafting, they just like put in the group like, hey, I'm going to be doing this, and anybody else can hop in. And so it makes it a lot more organic and has been really nice because now I can have more social time with these people that normally would have to be much more scheduled out and, you know, maybe once a month, and now it's happening twice a week.
So to the kind of remote playing question, right? So it's interesting, right? Because it's like you say, like, especially board games have, a lot of board games are about kind of perfect information, or at least like the wide view of the field, right? So it is interesting. You could certainly imagine kind of variations of board games where at least, you have several Zoom channels and different people only see part of the board and stuff like that. I guess you can imagine all kinds of interesting kind of things. I'm not sure that anybody has actually done it. So anything that involves like exploration of a larger space or the fog of war or something like that.
So I believe, like, particularly if you do, I mean, I've played a little bit with Tabletop Simulator, and to just answer an earlier question, you can actually physically interact with the board pieces. So you can actually throw the little houses and stack them on top of each other, and it does have a physics simulator that I personally found maybe also not that poignant, but I guess given the question that there's a market for that. And they also support this idea of like various fields of view. So you have like this idea that people hold cards, for example, and these cards are not visible to somebody else who could still freely rotate around the table. And I think the system itself is pretty moddable, so it does support, so you could play something like a Kriegsspiel or any of these kind of fog of war based games in there and have people specifically not see certain elements of the map, I reckon.
Yeah, Roll20 does that as well. And I'm sure tons of other tabletop role-playing game apps where instead of like having to draw out the map or, you know, put pieces of paper on it or whatever, instead, you know, everybody sees what the DM wants you to see.
Yeah. I mean, there's also this one, I mean, this hidden information thing is great. Another thing I was tempted to try out, but I never actually got to work when I was still running a campaign myself. I was wondering if I should do any of these kind of, you know, face swap apps or deep fakes to kind of turn myself into more believable NPCs when talking to them, which I guess would work over a Zoom channel. I'm not really sure if that would help with the game experience.
There's something I'm curious about. So in the last 5 years, maybe a bit more, we've seen a move towards hybrid board games where the board game is then augmented by, let's say, an app or something. So you play around the table, but then you have a phone on the table and the phone is doing things. And I'm wondering if we're going to start to see a trend in the opposite direction. So still hybrid board games, but now where the game is on the computer in some form, but there's an augmentation back into the physical. in some way. Either like here's some materials so each player can print, or like I said, it had to be sort of printing, or a format where you buy the sort of subscription of the game, and everybody gets like a box of some of the components that we will then use when we get together to play this thing, in a couple of days. I've even seen people doing, it's kind of weird how like circular this goes. So a lot of the escape room, physical, space-based escape rooms are now doing virtual versions of their own physical escape rooms. I don't mean virtual as in we built this thing in Unity or Unreal. I mean sort of some hybrid sense where they're able to take advantage of their physical space, but still allow participants to participate remotely, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's a whole new level.
I know I keep bringing up crafting, but
Oh,
to be fair, that's why Christoph, is that right, Christoph?
Yes.
Okay, that's why he invited me, is to talk about craft. So, woo! So in crafting circles, there's been games that have been played for quite a while where they're called mystery, whatever the craft is. So like mystery quilt, mystery knit, etc., where the participants are told basically here are the supplies you need, but they don't know what the final product is going to look like. And then every week, month, whatever, like another set of instructions is given. And so you're making the pieces, and everybody's got, they make different choices about colors and fabrics or yarns. And then at the end, you finally see what the full design is. And there's also a huge part of that is sharing on Instagram or other social media all throughout the project. So it creates this community of people who are like all working on it together. They have their own hashtag, and it's really popular. There's a ton of mystery quilt alongs and knit alongs, crochet alongs, etc., always going.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the reasons, I mean, I first of all, and I also invited you for all your other game knowledge, but I was curious when we talked about this in the prep, like if Unity feels like more affected, because I mean you could imagine that they like easily get marginalized, just like some other group left behind by this whole kind of going to remote play. Suddenly all our social lives happen there.
So Christoph, you're breaking up.
Dread.
So I guess Christoph was
just
asking,
imagine I something full and answer it.
I imagine Christoph was asking the question about how this affects marginalized groups. Isn't that what he was getting at?
I think so.
Yeah, and I think also, I don't, to me,
not that Christoph per se marginalized.
So I'm not a marginalized person, but I'm a parent, right? So and it's also to be kind of really clear that this thing hits people in lots and lots of different ways, and I think that's been hard for everybody to kind of grok, right? So even just for parents, it might be really so for some people it might be really difficult to schedule at a given moment, and for some people it might be difficult to kind of spend the number of hours. Or for some people it might be easy to kind of work in the evenings. For other people that might be like impossible, right? So I think it's just been kind of really important to kind of realize that like there's so many different types of ways that this has hit people.
Yeah, I think also for some people it's hard to make those connections or find have those interactions. Basically, you could go to the game store and run into someone and they might let you know, hey, there's a group or there's a discussion board. But if you're just like at home and you don't know like where things might be happening, it's like everything is moved into like private groups, and you can't run across them or run across like threads that you can then pull to get access.
Yeah, we've got more kinds of societies happening than we ever had before. Actually, one of the things that's been like a really lovely benefit of the quarantine situation is, so I'm friends with a lot of the generative artists on Twitter, a lot of whom are not wealthy academics or connected even to like the software scene. But we've had Twitter as so the people who can be on Twitter, they're only one step away from like contacting me and say like, hey, I made this thing, or hey, can you forward me a tutorial? So that's always been like a fairly open community. But I've since been able to say like, oh, it's not free, but if you've got 20 pounds, you can go to FDG this year. or ICCC or any of these things. So I've noticed actually, especially for the workshops, this big flood of people who said, like, this is my first time, I wouldn't have considered this otherwise.
Yes.
Having access to these spaces where otherwise it's like, yeah, you know, oh, how do you get to ICCC or FDG? Well, you write an NSF grant, and then in 3 to 5 years, you'll have money for a ticket. So that's been actually like a really nice benefit of like opening up some spaces that otherwise have been closed.
Yeah, although I do think that there is, I totally agree, by the way, like the accessibility of remote is so much better for the most part, as long as people have the technology and, let's say, the internet connection to enjoy it. And so that aspect is really nice, but there are definitely communities that, because it has become much more technologically driven, are, you know, are left out, are struggling a bit more. Although I feel like people are recognizing that and really working to try to support that. Like, you know, because we've been quarantined, there's been a lot more community building. And so at least I feel like it, like I'm closer to my neighbors than I've ever been. And, you know, so there's a lot of help with, you know, here's how to get Zoom working on your tablet or whatever. And I think, you know, for what it is, that's really helpful. I think for people without that technology or without that connection, that's got to be difficult.
Okay, can you guys hear me again?
Yes.
Excellent. So we were asked to wrap up in time so people have a chance for a little break. So I would like to try to. Oh, was it a cat I saw?
Yep. Here's Zoe.
Anyhow, I like to kind of wrap it up and bring it to an end. So maybe we could all close and do a final round of something you wish we might take away in terms of knowledge, or some kind of thing that might change in this kind of space as your, you know, hope and wish going forward. And any order you like, because I'm probably gonna disappear again in a second. Kate, you want to start?
So I was typing in chat and missed the question.
I did too.
Okay. So the question was, is there some kind of takeaway message from all of this that you think people should learn and take away, or is there some kind of hope for the future of something we should adopt from this time that would be good to keep?
Yep.
Or both.
Okay, so now having heard the question, I will now turn it around to just talk about what I wanted to talk about anyways, which, look, I could be a politician. But no, so I think the idea that like this community building and creation of novel society formations is like one of my biggest excitements in this space. Just the idea that like social groups are one thing, but we're also building like giant civic structures. So my research is all on casual creativity. And so seeing things where there are casual creators, and a couple that we saw at FDG this year are Ganimals and Baba Is Y'all, things where people are creating things and then creating large community structures around creating things. And baseball just because it's like so many games in one, but it is like a giant society structure with people creating stories, creating art, and then bubbling those up to the devs who then like bubble rules back down. So we're seeing extremely fun, novel structures of societies that have a lot of niches for different people to fill. So I think the idea that like we're just creating vast ecosystems of potential niches that people can figure out where they want to be in a space.
So I'm going to jump in and also answer a different question, and it's a question that came up in the chat, and it was highlighted again in the chat, and I want to make sure at least one person answered it, which was about the sort of the future of tabletop AR. I don't really see it going anywhere, to be honest. I haven't seen the killer app, the killer game, and the tech. I think it's too far out there still for many people to want to bother with sort of adding on this sort of extra layer. So I'm not convinced that tabletop AR is gonna go places into the mainstream, as it were. As to the other question, I think what gives me hope and happiness in many ways in these sort of dark times is the seeing people rediscover play in their lives, and enjoying that. And here I'm speaking of communities that would otherwise not. So, and obviously this is within my circle of contacts and people. So it's, you know, aunts and uncles and parents and you know, parents of friends and so on who would otherwise not play, otherwise not be playful, who have sort of taken to these kinds of playful activities in their now online life, which I think is really, really nice. So that's my hopeful, like I see hope in that, and that makes me pleased.
So I'd say I got kind of really, like preparing for this, I got really into this idea of doing kind of Assassins-like games for like Zoom meetings. So I have lots of like 80 people meetings, and I think that would be like really exciting. And I think probably it should be something, it's not like killing people, but something perhaps more subtle, or kind of like rock, paper, scissors kind of games where like if you wear red, like red shirt beats green shirt beats blue shirt or stuff like that. But you only get one move per meeting, stuff like that. I think there's like lots and lots of interesting stuff you could do. And so I think, yeah, anything that kind of could transform the Zoom experience, Zoom meeting experience, I think would be interesting.
Okay, yeah, as I said, I only get like about half what people are saying. So I hear Jesper's hope is killing people remotely in meetings, and we don't have time to correct that now, but let's, I think, go to Anne, who's the only person left with some final words.
Yes, and I'll answer your question, which is that I hope the takeaway is that, you know, this opens up ways for accessibility and new communities, and I think it would be really interesting to keep that in mind when you're creating these experiences.
Okay, so at this point, thank you very much for all of you for coming on and lending this time. Let's wrap it up at this point, but for those who want to continue this conversation, we'll have Discord on the panel section, and of course everybody is on Discord for the whole conference. Apologies to all of those questions that we didn't get to. It's you know, it's been a tough time on my internet connection, but thanks you all for attending, and I hope you enjoy the last day at FDG. And with that, I'll hand it back to our hosts.
Thank you all. We're going to take a break, and then we continue with the Game AI session here. So take your questions to Discord, take a quick break, and then we'll be back.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, that was cool.
I got 2 palindromes in. Jesper was good though.
I think I got 0. Everybody else beat me to the ones that I was going to take.
I think I'll count the cat one. The what's
All right.
that? The cat I saw.
That wasn't mine. That was yours, wasn't it?
Yeah. All my other ones got caught. Rotator, Zagas.
Ah.
Yeah, I got stats and level through. Those are my only 2.
Cool.
Well done.
Yeah,
It's been a pleasure playing with you guys.
yes.
And next time we'll talk about science.
Yes.
Bye-bye.